A Fox News alert, all eyes on President Trump as he arrives today for the first United Nations General Assembly of his presidency.
Today, the president will meet with world leaders, including the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the French President Emmanuel Macron.
And tomorrow, the president will take the stage in front of the General Assembly. So what should he say? Well, let's ask Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, 2012 GOP presidential candidate, Fox News contributor, and author of the book Understanding Trump. Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
So if you were to,
glad to be with you.
If you were to advise the president what he should say in front of this room of global elites, what would it be?
Well, I think he has three pretty powerful messages. First, that his vision of sovereignty and of America as a unique nation is legitimate and doesn't threaten anybody else. He expects everyone else to also be unique nations. But I think somebody who cuts through all the globalism and reasserts the legitimacy of national sovereignty is a very important step for the UN. Second, the UN has to reform itself. There are too many ways in which it is incompetent, inefficient, in some ways dishonest. And third, the planet has to come together on North Korea. North Korea is the greatest danger of a nuclear war that we have seen, I think, not just since the Cold War. I think it's a greater danger than, say, the Cuban Missile Crisis or other events during the Cold War. There's a very real danger here that we're going to somehow end up in a nuclear exchange that will kill an enormous number of people. And the planet has to take that seriously. And all the elements of the planet, including Russia and China, have to be brought to bear on convincing the North Koreans to step down and to limit their ambitions.
What needs to happen that's not happening now when it comes to North Korea?
Well, I think the Chinese in particular have got to cut them off. I mean, there are all sorts of games being played. There are a lot of ways that the North Korean economy continues to be financed by Russia and China. And I think those two countries have to understand they are risking a real war on their border if they allow this to continue, that the United States is not going to tolerate a dictatorship with ICBMs, with hydrogen warheads that could eliminate American cities. Yeah. No president could responsibly take the risk of somebody like Kim Jong-un literally wiping out Seattle or Chicago or Los Angeles. So if the Chinese and Russians don't want the danger of a preemptive war on their border, they had better get together and coerce the North Koreans into agreeing to stand down on their programs.
Mr. Speaker, a fellow by the name of John Moody is one of the executives here at Fox News Channel. He's got an op-ed at foxnews.com, and he says that the diplomats this week need to realize that everything that Donald Trump says, he means 100%. And the quote is, and one of the things he's going to say is, the U.S. is done with being blamed for everything that goes wrong in the world and then paying to fix it, which unfortunately we do a lot.
Well, I don't know if Trump's exactly going to say that, but I think it's a fair thing to say. We have been the most generous country in history. We accept more legal immigrants than any other country in history. We have poured tens of billions of dollars into foreign aid. We spend billions of dollars on humanitarian aid and trying to follow up after tsunamis and earthquakes. And we have provided security, for example, for Europe now since 1945. Yep. Yeah. So I think it is reasonable to say to the world, gee, you've got to do your share, too.
What's the biggest reform you would advocate for? Because you're right, we fund 22% of the UN, 28% of the peacekeeping mission, yet oftentimes it is wielded against us, whether it's the International Criminal Court or the Human Rights Commission, against us and our allies in an anti-Western way. How do you change that dynamic?
Well, I think we've got to look very seriously at whether or not in the long run you have to rethink the entire relationship and form some kind of organization of democracies, because you're exactly right. I mean, when you have the United States getting outvoted by disasters like Venezuela or Zimbabwe or other countries that are collapsing, dictatorships that are clearly kleptocracies, dictatorships like Putin's government, which has been assassinating people. I mean, one of the uncovered stories of the last 3 or 4 years is how many people the Russians have assassinated. And we pretend all of these are morally equal. Well, they're not. They may be facts, but they're not. They don't have the moral authority to tell us how we ought to live. And I think we need to be very clear about reshaping and redesigning the UN to be a limited discussion organization, not to have any pretenses of being a governing organization.
Yeah, something like a League of Democracies has been discussed in the past, a very interesting concept to get around this, which is a value-neutral construct. You've got dictatorships sitting next to freedom-loving people hoping they agree on something.
Well, and you have very tiny countries with 10,000 or 15,000 people who have the same vote as the United States. I mean, right. It would be as though we declared every county in the United States got to be a country, and so we had 3,300 votes at the UN. I mean, that's sort of what happens with these smaller countries.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I know you're talking about all your experience. You've worked for this country for so many years, and we appreciate all the hours and service that you have just graciously given to our country. You now have a video course online where you're teaching people about our country, and it's called Defending America. Tell the folks at home how they can be a part of this.
Sure. You can go to defendingamericacourse.com. And I put it together because I was watching how crazy the Antifa people are, how crazy some of the stuff on campuses is. And it seemed to me we need to be able to intellectually, those of us who want to defend America, who believe in the Constitution, who believe in the Founding Fathers, we need to be armed with the arguments and the stories and the facts to be able to take on the left and defeat them intellectually. And so this course is a really beginning point of trying to arm everybody who wants to defend America, whether it's on the right to bear arms, or it's on America as a unique civilization, or it's issues of religious liberty. And we currently have 6 introductory lessons, and they're all available at defendingamericacourse.com. And I think it's an exciting starting point to be able to go on college campuses and take on the left and not back down.
All right. Well, thousands have already signed up for it. Once again, it's defendingamericacourse.com. Newt Gingrich, thank you very much for joining us on this Monday.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Have a good week.
Hello, with more on the nuclear threat from North Korea and what President Trump will say about it when he addresses the United Nations during his first General Assembly speech on Tuesday. We're joined in studio by Ambassador John Bolton. He's a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Fox News contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. Ambassador, good to see you, in person, not just in Washington. So what does Ambassador Haley mean when she says that there are, quote, plenty of military options?
Well, I think that's certainly something the administration seems to be moving toward. I think it's regrettable still, though, that we hear about more sanctions and more diplomacy with North Korea. We've tried sanctions and diplomacy for 25 years. There is no tangible evidence that that strategy has slowed North Korea down at all. And if anything, in the past 6 months, the pace of their activity is increasing. So the idea that we finally found the right sanction, or we finally found the right verbal formulation and negotiation to dissuade North Korea from this course it's been pursuing these 25 years, I think is a waste of time. It's delusional, giving the appearance we're dealing with the North Korean nuclear weapons program when we're not.
Well, it appears that we will not dissuade them at all, that giving up the nuclear facilities is absolutely non-negotiable.
Well, it is, and let's remember what the North really wants here ultimately is to reconquer the South. This is what has motivated them since June the 25th, 1950, when they invaded South Korea. They have many other reasons to want nuclear weapons, but ultimately, when they get this capability, if we pursue the same course we're following now, next year, whatever, they will use it not to launch missiles at the United States immediately, but to extort what they want from us, forcing U.S. troops out of South Korea, making the South more vulnerable, forcing U.S. troops out of Japan, because they don't expect that any American administration will stand up to the threat.
But predictions of a military war or action would be untenable. You know, millions dead, 24 million in Seoul, for example. I mean, it's just something that really, frankly, for many is unthinkable.
Well, I think these predictions are exaggerated. Look, nobody wants war on the Korean Peninsula. But here's the question Americans should ask themselves. When this current crisis is over in a month or 6 months or a year, do you find it acceptable that North Korea would still have a capability to hit targets in the United States with nuclear weapons? If you're prepared to accept that, then fine. But if you don't want to live under the threat of blackmail by this bizarre regime. And the same question could be applied with respect to Iran. That's why the military option has to be on the table.
So what do you expect from the president on Tuesday? I mean, look, there have been 9 Security Council resolutions so far that have not stopped Kim Jong-un. What do you think he'll say to the diplomats?
Right. Look, I was there for the first 2. I mean, I've been through this drill, and, you know, the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We're not going to get a different result, even after this last missile test from North Korea. So I think the president has to make the case that it's unacceptable for international peace and security to have this kind of regime with these kinds of weapons. Now, we can solve the problem in one of two ways. We can get rid of the regime, or we can get rid of the weapons. Since the North isn't going to give them up voluntarily, this narrows and constrains what your options are. It doesn't do the United States or our innocent civilian population any good to blink this problem away and say, let's try one more sanction. Let's try one more conference. It's not going to change anything.
You just used the word insanity, and I'm reminded that the president used that word describing the United Nations. In an interview with me back in 2005, he said the UN was insanity. Here's some of his comments. I want to get your reaction.
The United Nations is not a friend of democracy. It's not a friend to freedom. It's not a friend even to the United States of America.
It's total insanity. It is either the most corrupt thing going on in the world, which is saying something, or it's one of the most incompetent things I've ever seen.
There it is, pretty tough. It's either the most corrupt or it's the most incompetent. It's insane. You think he'll use those words on Tuesday to the diplomats?
I doubt it, but we do pay 22% of all those things. That's our assessed share, even more for peacekeeping operations. I think we should move to a completely voluntary system, but I think the president will give what the State Department would describe as an anodyne speech. That is, it won't inflame anybody, and he won't get much of a reaction. When President George W. Bush used to visit the UN to give a speech each year, he'd refer to it as his annual visit to the Wax Museum because the diplomats just sat there and waited for it to be over.
Do you think he'll use the words radical Islamic terrorism in that hall?
He should. This is a place to speak directly to senior officials, not just UN ambassadors, but foreign ministers, heads of state from all over the world. And he needs to lay out the case to them as he has to the American people.
Ambassador John Bolton, who toiled in the vineyards of the United Nations for so many years. We'll see you this week. I'll be covering it, of course. So we'll see you back over there.
Looking forward to a long week at the UN.
As always, Ambassador, thank you.
Glad to be with you.